I want to cover with you real briefly the 6 reasons why Shot of Octane works to extend your learning in a workshop where most workshops fall short. And I'm not suggesting that workshops are bad. There's a lot of great ideas you get from workshops. We do workshops. The reality is when you leave the workshop, though, and you get in the car, it could be days, weeks, months before you use a particular technique. And as a result, you forget how the technique is supposed to be executed. The learning that you got in the workshop is not extended when you get into the field. With Sales Octane, what we use is called Shot of Octane, and it's a new concept that we created to extend the learning based on 6 reasons or 6 psychological principles. So Shot of Octane is based on science, and I just want to cover each one of the 6 and how it works. Now, these 6 reasons align with 6 ways that you learn or gather information. Number 1, you're going to learn based on repetition. If I tell you to go out and learn the piano, it's going to take you more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 lessons. You need to repetitively practice the piano. And yet the reality is when you go to a sales training workshop, you leave the workshop, and where's the repetition? Well, we're typically practicing on our customers, which is not a wise thing to do. Next, I'll get clients that tell me, well, we like pre-recorded webinars. And the reality is that's like watching paint dry, because in most cases it's primarily words, and the science shows that if you get some pictures, the retention increases to maybe 65%, but there's going to be a problem we'll talk about in just a second called brevity. So the reality is webinars don't really work to extend the learning because they're too long, because of point number 2, brevity. Learning needs to happen in short bursts that are repetitive. Now, look at YouTube. When somebody watches a YouTube clip, right now, on average, they'll stay on a clip for about 3 minutes and 11 seconds. That's what it is the day that I made this video. The reality is that number's dropping like a rock. Our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Well, think about this. When you go to a workshop, you're there for hours a day, maybe a couple of days. Where's the brevity in that? And if you leave after the fact and you get a DVD or perhaps some pre-recorded webinars, those are going to be 60 minutes to 90 minutes. Again, the brevity is not working for you. Point number 3, the learning has to become visual. A lot of folks will say, well, we get into coaching programs, Jim. Well, that's not terribly visual. If you go back and watch the Psychology of Selling principle number 15 about learning styles, take the complimentary assessment that's referenced in the video, and you'll probably find out that you're a visual learner. Second, there was a study done, and it's covered in Psychology of Selling principle number 4 video that talks about how people take in information. So whether it's your number 1 learning style or whether you're natural in terms of taking information in visually, the fact of the matter is, going to that workshop's not very visual, watching a pre-recorded webinar is not very visual, and you need repetition, you need it in short bursts, very brief, and it needs to be visual. Number 4, the training or the reinforcement needs to be in the context of how you would actually use the technique. Here's what I mean by that. If the techniques that you're learning are all based on phone skills, or if it's appointment skills, what you do when you're face-to-face with a customer, perhaps if your sales process involves occasionally going into the home, the reality is the training needs to happen in the same context. You need to see yourself on the phone. You need to see yourself in an office in front of a customer. You need to see yourself in the context of being in the home. You need to see the training in the context of how you're going to use it. Again, the reality is when you look at most sales training workshops and the follow-up approach, there's no context to actual use. Point number 5, recency. Now, recency means that the closer you learn a technique to the point where you actually try it, the greater the probability that you'll have recall and you'll remember how to use a technique successfully. Well, the reality is, in most cases, when you go to a workshop, it may be days, weeks, sometimes even a month before you're in a situation where you're going to use that technique with a client. And as a result, there is no recency. We need to get the learning literally right before we try the technique. So now we've got repetition. It's got to be brief. It needs to be very visual. You need to see yourself in the context of the way that you sell. Number 5, you need to be able to view this right before you actually try it. And we'll get to point 6 at the end. Well, here's how Shot of Octane works. It's very simple. The video clips start with 5 seconds just showing you real quickly the title of what you're about to learn. Then for 30 seconds, seconds to about 1:30 seconds is an illustration in the context of how you would use the technique. Then there's another 5-second visual showing you the fact that we're going to now give you details in the training for what you just saw in the technique. And then on average, it's 3 minutes to 6 minutes worth of training. Now, the reality is once you watch an entire shot of Octane clip, which again is typically below 7 minutes, the reality is you never need to watch the training again. You only need to watch the illustration. You need to see yourself repetitively watching the illustration of how to say it, how to do the technique, how to process this with your customer. That's how Shot of Octane works. It's very repetitive. You can watch it over and over again. Why? Because it's brief, a matter of a couple of minutes. It's very visual. You'll see yourself in the context of how you would use the technique, and you can watch it literally right before you try the technique. You can watch it in your car. Why? Because it's available in both a phone app and, of course, for your learning management system. Now, I mentioned point number 6. What's the 6? And I even recognize that this is one of the most important things that need to be included for good learning. And that is, it's got to be reinforced. In other words, you need to be trained and reinforced that you are learning the techniques. So the beautiful thing is, whether you're doing phone skills or face-to-face in the office or face-to-face in a residential setting, the bottom line is you can watch those video clips and then do some role plays and be coached by your manager, and that's going to reinforce you that you've got the technique. So, bottom line is, those are the 6 reasons why the Shot of Octane approach works. So, download the app, start using the techniques, and we'll see you at the finish line.